The letter came in a crisp cream envelope with my name written in an unfamiliar hand. No return address, no stamp meaning someone had driven here, to my small bungalow in Santa Monica, just to drop it in the slot. I had just finished brewing my morning coffee. The Pacific light was pouring through the blinds, casting long slatted stripes across my kitchen counter. For a moment, I thought maybe it was another condolence card. My brother, Thomas, had been gone less than 3 weeks. But when I slit the envelope with the butter knife and pulled out the folded page, my hands went cold. It wasn't a condolence card. It was a letter from his estate's executor. Dear Ms. Garrett, per the final will and testament of the late Mr. Thomas Garrett, you are to receive no portion of his estate, assets, or holdings, which total approximately $8 million in assessed value. The words swam on the page. All personal and financial assets are to be transferred to Mr. Garrett's business partner, one Mr. Andrew Coulter. No explanation. No signature from my brother's hand, just a dry line at the bottom, filed and verified by the offices of Coulter, Wren and Hathaway, LLP. I read it twice, then a third time, looking for some kind of misprint, a missing page, an addendum, something. But the more I stared, the more my pulse began to roar in my ears. Thomas had been my only sibling. We'd grown up in a cramped apartment over our father's auto shop, surviving on instant noodles and each other's stubborn loyalty. We'd both clawed our way into better lives, he in commercial real estate, me in the long, slow world of academic publishing. $8 million, and he left me nothing. I set the letter down and paced the kitchen. Thomas had never been subtle with money. He drove the kind of cars that made strangers pull out their phones, but he was generous, too. Birthdays, hospital stays, even when my roof leaked, he was the one who wrote the check. The idea that he'd cut me out completely, it didn't just hurt. It didn't make sense. The letter had no official probate stamp, only the firm's embossed logo. I ran my finger over it. The paper was thick and expensive. The name Coulter leaped out at me again. Andrew Coulter. I'd met him twice. Once at a dinner party where he talked about leveraging municipal code exemptions with the same relish other people used to describe wine. And once at Thomas's 50th birthday, when he'd clinked my glass and said, "Your brother's a genius, but he needs a firmer hand with his assets." I picked up the phone and called the number printed at the top of the letter. A woman with a velvet voice answered. "Coulter, Wren and Hathaway. This is Margaret Garrett," I said. "I just received a letter stating my brother's will leaves me nothing. I'd like to see a copy of the original document." Her tone cooled instantly. "All inquiries regarding Mr. Garrett's estate must be made in writing." "I am making an inquiry," I said. "I want to see my brother's signature." "Ma'am, you'll need to speak with Mr. Coulter directly. He's unavailable until next Thursday." The call clicked dead before I could answer. By noon, the marine layer had burned off, and the sunlight seemed too sharp, too cheerful. I drove to Thomas's penthouse in Marina del Rio, or rather, what had been his penthouse. The doorman, Gary, looked up from his desk and gave me a small, pained smile. "Margaret," he said, "I'm sorry about Thomas. I didn't expect to see you today. I need to pick up some personal items." I lied. "Is anyone up there?" He hesitated. "Mr. Coulter's been coming and going. He has the keys now." When I stepped off the elevator into the hallway, the door to Thomas's unit was ajar. Voices floated out, one low and firm, one higher, with the brittle edge of irritation. "Keep anything that could be contested out of sight," the lower voice said. "Margaret will fight this." The higher voice answered. "She won't win." The first voice replied, "Not with what we have on file." My pulse thudded. I moved silently to the doorframe and peered in. The living room was in disarray, drawers open, papers stacked in messy towers. Coulter stood by the window in a charcoal suit, his back to me. A woman I didn't know sorted through a leather-bound folio on the coffee table. I could have walked in and demanded answers. Instead, I took a single step back, letting the door swing closed, until only a thin line of light spilled onto the hall carpet. Then, I turned and walked away. By the time I got home, I had already called my attorney. James Farrow wasn't flashy mid-60s horn-rimmed glasses, the kind of man who still carried a leather briefcase, but he had the tenacity of a terrier. He listened quietly as I explained, then asked only one question. "Do you have reason to believe this will was altered?" "Yes," I said. "I have reason to believe my brother never wrote it at all." There was a pause. Then, "Don't contact them again. Leave that to me." "And Margaret?" "Yes. If they've done what I think they've done, We're going to turn their $8 million win into a very public loss. James didn't waste time. By the next morning, he'd already filed a formal request with the Los Angeles County Probate Court for a certified copy of Thomas S. will. The clerk's office quoted a 7-day processing time, but James had friends in enough dusty corners of the system to shave that down to 3. In the meantime, he gave me homework. Margaret, he said over the phone, I want you to write down everything you can remember about your brother's last 6 months. Every meeting, every trip, every time he mentioned Coulter or money. No detail is too small. So I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and poured 6 months of memory onto paper. The dinner we'd had in June, where Thomas seemed distracted, checking his phone every few minutes. The July yacht trip he took with clients, no names given. The August phone call when he said he'd made a big move but wouldn't he explain. What struck me, as I wrote, was how often Coulter's name popped up like a watermark beneath the surface of our conversations. It was always casual. Andrew says we should diversify, or Andrew thinks I should restructure the LLC. At the time, I'd assumed they were just business partners with strong opinions. Now it read like a slow tightening of a net. 3 days later, James called. We have the will. I drove to his small office in Culver City. The walls lined with law books and framed black and white photographs of old Los Angeles. He handed me a manila folder. Inside was a photocopy of the will, 8 pages long, with the final page bearing Thomas's signature in blue ink, except it wasn't his signature. Not exactly. It was close to looping G in Garrett, the slight backward slant, but the T in Thomas was wrong. My brother always drew the crossbar with a flourish, like a banner. Here it was, flat, perfunctory. James pointed to the witness lines. Both witnesses are employees of Coulter, Wren and Hathaway. That's unusual usually. Witnesses are neutral parties. Here, they're from the same firm, benefiting from the will. I flipped through the big S's. Everything: the penthouse, the investment accounts, the vintage car collection. Even our father's old Rolex was left to Coulter. Not a single item to family. James asked. Not even his guitar, I said, my throat tight. He taught me to play on that thing when we were kids. James leaned back. If this is a forged or coerced will, they'll have gone to lengths to cover it. But there's a crack here. He tapped a date on the first page. This was supposedly signed on September 14th. Where was your brother that day? I thought. He was in the hospital. Mild stroke scare. I visited him. James's eyes sharpened. Was he well enough to conduct legal business? He couldn't hold a pen without his hand shaking, I said. The nurse had to fill out his lunch menu. We drove to the hospital together that afternoon. James requested the patient records for September 14th, and after some wrangling, the records clerk provided a copy. Vitals, notes from the attending physician, and a small but significant Thomas was on a sedative drip from 10 a.m. to 9 p.m. The will, according to the witness statement, had been signed at 3:15 p.m. James closed the folder. That's our first nail. That evening, I walked the marina and thought about the conversation I'd overheard in Thomas's penthouse about keeping anything that could be contested out of sight. It was almost dark when I spotted a familiar figure stepping off a sleek black motorboat. Coulter, in his immaculate suit, carrying a slim briefcase. He moved quickly toward the parking lot, but not before exchanging a nod with a man leaning against a silver Mercedes. The man looked up. Our eyes met. He froze for a fraction of a second, then turned away. I didn't know him, but I'd seen that same suit jacket folded over a chair in Thomas's office once, weeks before his death. The next morning, James called again. Margaret, I want you to stay clear of Coulter for now. No confrontations. We're going to bait our hook, and I want him to swim right into it. What's the bait? I asked. An heir's petition to examine all safe deposit boxes, personal and business, associated with Thomas Garrett. He paused, and I could almost hear the faint smile in his voice. If Coulter's hiding anything, physical alternate versions of the will, unsigned drafts, it'll be there. And once we're in, anything we find is admissible. 2 hours later, James filed the petition. By that afternoon, Coulter's firm had already lodged an objection. James expected it. What they don't expect, he said, is that the probate judge handling this case is someone I've known for 30 years, and she does not like stonewalling. I asked him if we had a real chance. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he handed me the manila folder with the hospital records. We don't just have a chance, Margaret, he said quietly. We have a fuse. Now we just need to light it. The hearing on our petition was set for the following Wednesday. I dressed in a charcoal skirt suit that hadn't seen daylight since my university board days and met James at the Stanley Mosque Courthouse in downtown Los Angeles. Coulter was already there. He wore a midnight blue suit with a silk tie, the color of deep wine. His cufflinks glinted as he shook hands with his attorney, a tall woman with a voice like a gavel. When his eyes found me across the hall, he smiled. But it was the kind of smile you'd give someone you were about to beat in a game you'd already fixed. "Remember," James murmured, "we're not here to win everything today. We're here to make the judge curious." The probate courtroom was smaller than I expected, almost intimate, with polished wood panels and the faint smell of lemon polish. Judge Martinez, a woman in her early 60s with sharp eyes and a calm presence, took the bench. James presented our case succinctly: the unusual witness arrangement, the hospital records from the date of the will signing, and the need to inspect all safe deposit boxes linked to Thomas Garrett's name or business. Coulter's attorney countered smoothly, arguing that the will was valid, witnessed, and filed according to California law, and that the request for access to safe deposit boxes was a fishing expedition. Judge Martinez leaned forward. "Counselor, if the petitioner has credible evidence that the testator may not have had capacity to sign, it's not fishing, it's due diligence." Coulter's attorney started to protest, but the judge cut her off. Petition granted. Inspection to take place within 10 days. Outside the courtroom, Coulter stopped me. "Margaret," he said smoothly, "you're making this harder than it has to be." "Harder for whom?" I asked. His smile didn't move his eyes. "For everyone." Thomas was impulsive. I helped him put his affairs in order. He didn't want you to have to manage the weight of his portfolio. I held his gaze. "If that's true, you shouldn't mind me seeing every scrap of paper he left behind." For the first time, a shadow crossed his expression. Then he stepped aside and walked away. The safe deposit box was at a Bank of America branch in Century City. James and I met there with a court-appointed officer. The bank manager, a man with a permanent squint from decades under fluorescent lights, led us to the vault. Coulter arrived late, his attorney in tow. He signed the access log without a word to me. The officer opened the box and placed its contents on a felt-covered table. Inside, a stack of property deeds, several antique watch cases, a leather-bound ledger, and an envelope marked Private MG in Thomas's handwriting. My breath caught. James picked up the envelope and handed it to the officer, who confirmed my initials matched the petitioner's. "You may open it," the officer said. I slid my finger under the flap and pulled out a letter dated September 10th, 4 days before the supposed will signing. "Maggie, if you're reading this, I'm either gone or someone's gone too far. Andrew's been pushing me to make changes I don't trust. He says it's for tax purposes, but I think he's lining something up for himself. If anything happens to me, get James Farrow. He'll know what to do." James read over my shoulder, his jaw tightening. "This is it," he said softly. "This is your brother telling you the will's not real." Coulter didn't flinch when he saw the letter. He only said, "That proves nothing. Anyone can write a note." But his attorney's fingers drummed once against the table, a faint and restless sound. The court officer photographed the letter, sealed it in an evidence envelope, and logged it for the probate file. James leaned close to me. "This changes everything. We're going to request handwriting verification on both the note and the will. And when they don't macho, when the ink dates tell the truth, we have leverage." That night, I sat in my kitchen with the letter spread out in front of me. The loop of Thomas's Maggie was so familiar it hurt. I thought about the last time we'd spoken, a short, slightly distracted call where he'd promised we'd talk more next week. That week never came. The letter was more than a clue. It was his last instruction. 3 days later, James called with another development. "Our handwriting expert's initial review says the will's signature is almost certainly traced. The cross-pressure on the T is inconsistent with natural writing. It's a slow drag, not a fluid motion." "What does that mean legally?" I asked. "It means if we can prove forgery, the whole document is void. And if there's no earlier valid will, California intestacy laws kick in, which put you at the top of the list." I stared at the letter. "So instead of nothing," James finished for me, "you inherit everything your brother actually left you." But he also warned me, "Coulter won't roll over. Men like him don't lose quietly. Expect him to try and shake you before this gets to court." He was right. The first sign came that evening. I knocked at my door after dark. I peered through the peephole. A man I didn't recognize stood there, holding a flat cardboard box. "Delivery," he said. "I didn't order anything," I replied. "It's paid for," he said, and set the box on my doorstep before walking away. When I opened it, there was no return label. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was my father's old Rolex, the one listed in the will as belonging to Coulter. And under it, a note in block letters. I stared at the Rolex on my kitchen table until the seconds blurred into a silver halo. My father's watch brushed steel, with the faint hairline scratch from the day he dropped it behind the shop compressor sat there like a relic from another life. Whoever sent it had crossed a line. This wasn't just intimidation. This was someone digging into the most private corners of my past, just to prove they could. I called James. 20 minutes later, he was at my door, coat flapping, briefcase in hand. He didn't touch the watch. Instead, he pulled on a pair of nitrile gloves and slid it into an evidence bag. "This is good," he said. I blinked at him. "Good. It's a threat. It's also proof they re-tampering with estate property they claim is already theirs." He said, "That's a gift-wrapped conversion claim. We can use it." He photographed the box, the tissue, and the block letter note. Then he looked me in the eye. "You're not staying here tonight." "I'll be fine." "You won't," he said gently. "And you don't have to prove that you can." By sunset, I was in the small fold-out bed in his Culver City office. While I unpacked an overnight bag, James worked at his desk, fingers flying over the keys. By midnight, he had a motion for an emergency injunction ready to file. At 1 a.m., the on-call judge signed the temporary order. Coulter was barred from removing or relocating any estate property. A special administrator would inventory assets within 48 hours. James leaned back, exhaustion and satisfaction etched into the lines around his eyes. We just turned their scare tactic into a legal wall. I tried to sleep, but at 3 in the morning, I sat up. Something about the watch's weight nagged at me. I held it under the desk lamp, tracing my fingertip over the clasp. "They're a ridge under the metal, James," I whispered. "Tweezers." He handed me a pair. I teased up the edge of what looked like a sliver of tape. Underneath, a glint of brass, a key. Tiny, old-fashioned, and stamped with 3 letters and numbers. "PT Impatsata Tuju." James exhaled. "Pacific Trust, Bach 417. Your brother hid a key in your father's watch, and they sent it to you without realizing it." By sunrise, we were standing inside a marble-fronted building on Wilshire Boulevard, the words Pacific Trust carved deep into the stone. The vault air was cool and metallic. When the key turned, the manager slid out a narrow box and set it on the felt-covered table. Inside, 2 thin manila folders and a black USB drive in a plastic sleeve. On the top folder, in Thomas's handwriting, "If Andrew wins, open this." The first folder was a series of printed emails, months of back and forth between Thomas and Coulter. Coulter urged temporary asset reallocations into shell LLCs with names like Bay Zephyr Holdings and Sirocco Ventures. Thomas pushed back, circling one line in red ink and writing beside it, "No, not like this." The second folder was colder. Bank transfer receipts showing hundreds of thousands moving from Thomas's credit line into an account ending in 1137, and at the back, a notarized affidavit from Elise L., swearing she'd witnessed Thomas sign a revised testamentary document on September 14th. James tapped the stamp. "We'll check her commission. If it expired before that date, it's another nail in the coffin." We opened the USB back at James's office. 2 files. voice_note.m4a and draft_will.pdf. James clicked the audio. My brother's voice filled the room, familiar, rasped at the edges. "Maggie, if Andrew has a will that cuts you out, it isn't mine. He asked me to sign something while I was on medication after the stroke scare. I refused. If I'm gone, get Pharaoh. Check Elise L.'s notary commission. She's Andrew's cousin. The draft attached is what I intended. 50% to you. 22 Mom's Church scholarships, and 32 affordable housing projects. If this reaches you, I didn't finish the paperwork. I'm sorry for the mess. Don't let him bully you." I pressed my hand over my mouth. The room seemed to tilt. The PDF was a clean, lawyerly draft, dated 2 days before Thomas's hospital stay. It wasn't executed, but it was intended. James called his clerk. "Run Elise L. through the Secretary of State's database. I want her commission dates." The clerk called back within the hour. Elise's commission had expired in August. She wasn't legally a notary when she witnessed the September 14th will. I looked at James. What now? He smiled grimly. Now, Margaret, we light the fuse. The evidentiary hearing was set for the following Monday. James arrived at my house before dawn, his briefcase heavier than usual, his tie already knotted. Today's not the trial, he reminded me as we drove downtown. It's about showing the judge enough smoke to warrant a full fire inspection. I nodded, clutching the folder with Thomas's note, the audio file transcript, and the expired notary record. The courtroom was half full when we arrived. Coulter sat at the defense table, immaculate as ever, his expression unreadable. Beside him was Elise, younger than I expected, with perfectly highlighted hair and a neutral skirt suit. She avoided my eyes. Judge Martinez opened proceedings briskly. James began with the September 14th hospital records, then layered on the handwriting analysis and the notary expiration. Each piece was measured, deliberate as steady tightening of threads. Then he played the audio. Thomas's voice echoed through the room. If Andrew has a will that cuts you out, it isn't mine. By the time it ended, you could hear the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. Coulter's attorney objected, calling the recording unauthenticated hearsay, but James was ready. He presented the USB's chain of custody, the Pacific Trust Vault records, and the embedded metadata showing the file's creation date matched Thomas's hospitalization. Judge Martinez leaned back. Counselor, this isn't proof beyond doubt, but it certainly raises substantial questions about the document's validity. She turned to Coulter's side. Do you have a rebuttal at this time? Coulter's attorney glanced at him, then said, not without further review, Your Honor. Outside the courthouse, Coulter caught up to me. You think you've got momentum, he said quietly, but all you've done is make me careful. I held his gaze. Careful is what guilty people get when they've been caught holding the match. He gave a small, humorless laugh. We'll see who gets burned. That afternoon, James filed a motion to suspend Coulter's role as executor pending trial. The judge granted it, appointing a neutral fiduciary to manage the estate until the case was resolved. It was a blow to Coulter's control, and it showed. Within days, the fiduciary began combing through Thomas's accounts. They found transfers totaling $2.3 million into entities Coulter controlled, all within 3 weeks of Thomas's death. The paper trail was crisp, the amounts large enough to make prosecutors interested. James called me into his office. We're at a fork, he said. We can push for a criminal referral now, or we can keep it in our back pocket and leverage it for a civil settlement that restores your rightful share. What would Thomas want? I asked. James studied me for a moment. Based on that note, he'd want the truth on record, which means we let this go to trial. I felt the weight of it the months ahead, the scrutiny, the possibility of losing, but I also felt something steadier than fear, resolve. Then we go to trial, I said. The weeks before trial were a blur of depositions, document reviews, and strategy sessions. Elise's testimony was the crack we needed. Under oath, she admitted Coulter had assured her it was fine to witness despite her expired commission, that it was just a formality. James's smile was razor-thin when he leaned toward me afterward. That's not just negligence, that's intent. 2 nights before trial, I found an envelope wedged into my storm door. No stamp, no address. Inside a single sheet of paper, blank except for one line in block letters. Settle or regret. I showed it to James. He slid it into a file without comment, but his eyes told me everything. Coulter was feeling the walls close in, and in less than 48 hours, those walls were going to get even tighter. The first day of trial felt like stepping into a room where every sound echoed a little too loudly. The courtroom smelled faintly of coffee and old wood polish. Reporters clustered along the back row, at a swarm, but enough to remind me that $8 million and a forged will made for good headlines. Coulter sat at the defense table, posture perfect, his expression cool. I wondered if anyone else could see the faint tension in his jaw, the way his thumb pressed against the side of his pen. Judge Martinez called us to order. James opened with quiet precision, laying out our theory. Thomas's true intent documented in the draft will and USB message, the hospital records proving incapacity, the expired notary commission, and the suspicious transfers after his death. This, James said, holding up a blown-up image of the forged signature, is not the hand of a man in control of his faculties. This is the hand of someone being used. Coulter's attorney countered with practiced confidence. painting me as a distant sister swooping in for money I hadn't earned, claiming the recording was fabricated and dismissing the USB discovery as mysterious and conveniently timed. I kept my face still, even as the words stung. The second day brought Elise to the stand. Under direct examination from Coulter's attorney, she stuck to her script. She'd witnessed Thomas sin the will, he'd been alert, and he'd discussed his intentions. Then James rose for cross-examination. His voice stayed calm, almost conversational. "Elise, when did your notary commission expire?" Her eyes flicked to Coulter before answering. "August 28th. And the will you witnessed that was signed when?" "September 14th. James let the pause stretch. "So on that date, you were not a legally commissioned notary in the state of California, correct?" A faint flush crept up her neck. "Correct." "Did you tell Mr. Coulter your commission had expired?" "Yes." "And what did he say?" She swallowed. "That it didn't matter. That it was just a formality." A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Martinez tapped her pen against the bench. Order James moved on. "Did Mr. Coulter ever indicate that the will you were notarizing might be contested?" Another glance at Coulter. "Yes," he said Maggie would fight it. By day 3, the fiduciary had testified about the $2.3 million in transfers, the account numbers traced directly to LLCs, where Coulter was the sole managing member. James had the bank statements projected on the screen, each highlighted transaction a blow to Coulter's credibility. Coulter's attorney objected repeatedly, irrelevant, speculative. But most objections were overruled. When it was my turn to testify, James kept it simple. He asked about my relationship with Thomas, the letter I'd found in the Pacific Trust box, and the Rolex delivery with the hidden key. Holding the watch in my hand on the stand, I felt the weight of it all over again, not just metal and gears, but years of loyalty. Arguments, late-night calls, and shared history. "I didn't come here for money," I told the court. "I came here because my brother trusted me to protect what mattered to him. This case is about his voice being replaced with someone else's." In closing arguments, James wove the strands together. The hospital records, the forged signature, the expired notary, the hidden key, the recorded message, and the transfers. "Your Honor," he said, "this isn't just a forged will. It's a story of someone trying to erase blood in favor of greed. The law doesn't reward that." Coulter's attorney argued there was no definitive proof Thomas hadn't changed his mind, that the draft will was incomplete, and that the recording could not be fully verified. Judge Martinez listened, her expression giving nothing away. She announced she would deliver her ruling the next morning. That night, I barely slept. The city outside my window felt quieter than usual, as if it, too, was holding its breath. At 8:55 a.m., I was back in the courtroom, hands clasped in my lap. Coulter sat 2 tables away, his tie slightly askew for the first time. Judge Martinez began, "This court finds substantial evidence that the will dated September 14th was executed under conditions that render it invalid. Specificity, questions of capacity, undue influence, and procedural defects in witnessing. The will is void. The estate will pass under California intestacy law to the petitioner, Margaret Garrett, as sole surviving heir." She paused, then added, "Furthermore, the matter of posthumous transfers to entities controlled by Mr. Coulter is referred to the district attorney for review." For the first time in weeks, I let out a full breath. James smiled small, but with the satisfaction of a man who'd kept a promise. Coulter didn't look at me as the bailiff handed him paperwork, but his knuckles were white against the handle of his briefcase. It was over. And yet, I knew the ripple of it would stretch far beyond the courthouse doors. When I stepped out of the courthouse, the California sun hit me like a spotlight. Reporters called my name, their voices a jumble of questions, but I kept moving. James walked beside me, steady as a metronome, his briefcase swinging lightly now that it carried victory instead of strategy. We didn't speak until we reached the curb, where the traffic light held us in a small island of shade. "You did it," he said simply. "No," I corrected. "We did it, and Thomas helped." Back home, I unlocked the front door and let the quiet settle over me. The letter from the executor still sat where I'd left it weeks ago. But now it was just paper, not a verdict, not a threat. On the kitchen table, I set down the Rolex. I turned it over in my hand, feeling the cool metal warm against my skin. That hidden key had been more than a clever trick. It had been Thomas's way of making sure I'd have the truth, even if he wasn't here to tell it himself. 2 days later, the court-appointed fiduciary arrived with an inventory list for me to review. It wasn't the dollar signs that caught my eye, was the small things, our father's toolbox, the guitar Thomas taught me to play, and a box of Polaroids from summers at the shop. I signed the forms, knowing every item was now legally mine. But more than that, I felt like I'd pulled something intangible back into my hands. My place in my own family's story. Coulter's name would surface again in legal bulletins when the district attorney's office pursued its review. Maybe there would be charges. Maybe there wouldn't. That part didn't matter as much anymore. Because for all his schemes, in the end, he'd failed at the one thing he wanted most, to write me out. On the first Sunday of spring, I took the Rolex down to the pier. The ocean air smelled of salt and sunscreen, and the gulls wheeled overhead like restless witnesses. I wound the watch, listening to the tick steady, insistent, alive. I thought about the last words of Thomas's recording. Don't let him bully you. I smiled, faint and sure. I didn't. When I walked back toward home, the tide was coming in, slow and certain, reclaiming what was always meant to be its own. And I realized that was the lesson in all of this. Sometimes the fight isn't about winning something new. It's about not letting go of what's already yours.